Good evening and welcome to this digitally enabled special meeting of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth held on Monday, March 29th, 2021. I'm Mayor Todd Kasenberg and I'll call this meeting to order. I ask the Deputy Clerk to note our starting time for the minutes as 7 p.m. Today's meeting is being streamed live on the Municipality of North Perth YouTube channel and will be available there after the meeting as an archived video. Anyone who is invited to speak will be recorded and their voice, image, and comments of the live stream. The chair and or the clerk have the discretion and authority at any time to direct the termination or interruption of live streaming. Such direction will only be given in exceptional circumstances where deemed relevant. Circumstances may include instances where the content of debate is considered misleading, defamatory, or potentially to be published. Thank you. Welcome to those joining us via the YouTube channel tonight. Councillors, staff, and delegations participate in this meeting. At this time, I invite your decorum over the course of the coming meeting. I have not received any attendance. I can confirm that all council. Let's move then to item 1.1 of our agenda pertaining to pecuniary interest. For the benefit of those unfamiliar with council practices, provincial legislation requires councillors with a potential pecuniary or financial interest in any item at the council table to declare this interest and to remove her or himself from discussions and voting on the item. In accordance with the recommended protocol at this time, I invite all councillors with pecuniary interest or potential pecuniary interest, including those who have declared in writing, and there weren't any tonight, to verbally advise the chair in public session and to submit documentation to this effect in writing to the clerk. Councillors are further reminded that should a potential conflict arise during the meeting, they may so declare and act at any point in the meeting. Councillors, have any of you anything to declare on this front at this time? We're not seeing anything, so let's move forward. To explain our virtual processes, and there are too many resolutions tonight, Council. I will be systematically, again, as usual, trying to seek consent from you as movers and seconders the various resolutions before us tonight. Again, as always, as I have since this pandemic has started, I'll try to do this alphabetically. Should a councillor not wish to respond to the request, they may say so, and I will move on to the next name in the list. Regarding speaking to our business, I think we have a somewhat more relaxed rules session tonight by very nature of it being a special council meeting. But certainly we would continue to invite councillors to invite themselves to speak through our conferencing technologies chat function. The clerk will, again, as usual, assist me in maintaining the speaking order from that source. Councillors are allowed to deliver a primary question or comment and may make one supplemental without intervention from me. We'll follow that speaking order just to be polite, and any councillor wishing to have a second say will have the opportunity to indicate again and go to the bottom of the list. All of this consistent with Robert's Rules of Order. Councillors are reminded that if I can't hear you, I'll let you know when I've called upon you. Certainly we ask you to maintain a mute state during the web conference until you're called upon to speak. Should any votes that are happening tonight not show up in eScribe, I'll call on you when things seem stalled to register a manual vote, or you can leap forward and just let me know by taking yourself off mute. Again, at that occasion, answer yes or no on the motion, and then we'll ask you to return to mute. That brings us to item 2 on our agenda tonight. I have a motion before me for the adoption of the agenda of tonight's meeting that reads as follows: that the agenda for tonight's meeting be approved. Deputy Mayor Kellum, will you serve as mover for that?
Yes, I'll make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Johnston, will you serve as the seconder for that?
I certainly would second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, let's have that vote. And we're missing, there we go. And that is unanimously carried. Thank you, Council. We have no delegations scheduled in the dedicated delegation section of our agenda, but we do have delegations participating in scheduled agenda items a little bit later in our meeting. So we'll hear from some folks a little bit later. Let's turn then to item 4 on our agenda. That moves us past item 3. We have received the 2020 year-end report from Perth County's Community Emergency Management Coordinator, Todd McComb. I want to take note at this time that Mr. McComb will shortly be leaving the county's employ, and I want to extend a personal thanks for his remarkable dedication and rising to every call during this pandemic period. He certainly had one of the harder jobs around us during this period, and I'm going to take liberties on behalf of this council to extend you all the best in your next role, as I understand it, in Aylmer, heading the fire department there. Mr. McComb will provide us an overview of his year-end report as our Community Emergency Management Coordinator and answer questions supported as needed by Clerk Fairfelts and other players at the table, during which council roles and responsibilities will be discussed. Todd, welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship. Thank you very much. Good evening, Council. Thank you very much, Your Worship, for your kind words at the start. It's been my pleasure to serve Perth County and the municipality of North Perth in the role as the CEMC. You have a great staff and great leadership there. Made the job quite easy, honestly. So again, thank you for your recognition. Your Worship, if it pleases Council at this time, I understand they have the report in front of them. I would just go through and pick some of the highlights if that's okay with Your Worship.
Yes, that sounds great. Thanks, Todd.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. I would like the Mayor and the Council to accept my report, the 2020 Emergency Management Program Year-End Report, for information at this time. The comments that I'm going to attach to this is this attached report that is before you provides an overview of the 2020 activities and accomplishments of the program, along with the work plan for the upcoming 2021 year. Including in this is the training, the emergency plan updates, and some education objectives. With the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the CEMC continues to respond and to involve to the needs of the community and the municipality, along with alternating and realigning my service delivery methods and providing and continue to provide my core functions despite the restrictions that we all face at these sometimes trying times, Your Worship. What I'd like to do is go over to excuse me, page 6 of 8. I think this is the one that's going to interest everyone else, and I'll take everybody's attention to F. That should be 2021 as a notable achievements is assisting my member municipalities in the delivering of the COVID vaccine and set up the immunization clinics and help to oversee those operations. In the typical CMC role, we don't see that in a typical year. Well, I don't have to tell anybody on council that this is not a typical year. Last year was not a typical year, and the times to come are not going to be typical. When we started working with PPH and developing and city mass immunization and started to discuss how we do this to the communities, it was my very strong belief I wanted to bring the clinics as much as I could to my member municipalities. And with the assistance of your clerk and CAO and mayor, we were able to do that. And I hope this continues in the future. And I hope PH acknowledges the support that they get from North Perth when we do bring these to the community. That was one achievement that I was very proud of. And again, assisting with your clerk had a huge part of that. So I would like to recognize Pat for her outstanding work and your staff as well for their assistance to make that come reality. The other one I like everybody's attention to, Your Worship, is page 7 of 8, my 21 work plan. I felt it very important because I wanted to make sure that everybody was in good shape on my departure. I wanted a plan for municipality going to work out the rest of the year. Everyone knows that COVID is on the front burner, but we still have obligations and certain responsibilities to hit with the provincial government for our compliance for 21. So I tried to generate a roadmap with the assistance from the POC and my field officer, just to kind of give us a guideline to work within and hit those goals. And I'm happy to report to you, Worship and Council, that we are on track as far as we can see on this document to hit that target. So I'm happy to report that at this time as well, Your Worship. I believe that's the highlights that I wanted to bring forth to council at this time regarding my report. Again, at the end, if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. I've had a few questions regarding council involvement in an emergency and what their roles and responsibilities are, Your Worship. So I'd just like to go over that and clear it up a little bit. So in your emergency plan for the municipality of North Perth, on page 10 of 41, section 2251, it actually gives the roles and responsibilities, and it starts with yourself, actually, Mayor. It starts with the roles of the head of council. So the roles of the head of council are to provide overall leadership in responding to an emergency. The head of council would chair the emergency control group, which the mayor has. The mayor also declares the emergency and the designated areas of which we will have an emergency declared in. And it goes on, ensure the members of the council are advised of the declaration and the termination of an emergency and are kept informed as we go through this emergency process that we're all involved in. So, Your Worship, where the rest of council fits into this is, of course, in your absence, the deputy mayor would step in. He would assume your roles. If by that fortunate or unfortunately our deputy mayor wasn't available, it would fall under the municipal act, which I'm going to turn to my clerk for clarification, which would involve the rest of council, and the CAO also as well would guide us through that process. Some municipalities have chosen to give the CAO powers of immediate, that your CAO can make the decision immediately if we can't get enough council involvement or another representative from council to assist us with that decision. So you can see, council, it's important that you are aware of what's going on, and I know you certainly are. In case you ever had to come to that role, you would have great guidance from your CAO, your clerk, your alternate CEMCs for the county, and as well as your CMC, which I mentioned, which would advise and assist with any questions that you had through the process. At this time, I'd like to open it up to any questions that anybody from council may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Cohn. Clerk Bearfelds, do we have a list accumulating of people who wish to speak with questions? Councillor Andreessen, I think, is first. We think is first.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg. I do have a couple of questions. My first question is just about regarding during the pandemic, which occurred, of course, and started earlier in March of 2020. There was some issues with different mayors in our own county who were declaring state of emergency or not declaring state of emergency. And I just wondered if that caused some issues or concern when we were going through this this exercise, I guess. And the second question I have is just around feedback. Given the fact that we've gone through a lot of emergency procedures, will there be feedback that will be gathered from municipalities as well?
Yes, well, through the mayor, we'll talk about the declarations first. What we do is we present our information to all the mayors and the wardens in the county, and we let them make an informed decision. I will agree, Councillor, it's easier for me when the group moves together in a coordinated effort. When we all declared emergency, I think it at the same time and remain in an emergency. Sometimes it can be a little bit more understandable for a citizen of Perth County and in the whole of Perth County to understand that, hey, why is this community in a declaration and why is this community not? To that, I will expand that a little bit. Some communities don't have the services and the programs available that larger municipalities in Perth County do, and you're one of the larger ones. And so they look at it as what best serves their people. So I stand behind the councils and the mayors who make that decision, whether they feel they need to be in a declaration or not. It is unified when everybody is in a declaration together and terminates together. I think it brings a more understanding, but I certainly respect and stand behind their decisions if they choose otherwise. Your second question was about, well, my note says debriefing. So yes, as we terminate our emergency and we move through the recovery process and we terminate, your CEMC, along with your CAO and your clerk, we will hold a debriefing for council where we look at everything that worked, we looked at everything we were involved in, and we take it apart and we put it back together. And we learn from the experience. It might change your emergency plan a little bit. It might change the way we approach emergencies in the future. So both very good questions, and I'm hoping that answered your questions, Councillor.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I'm sorry my sound was very poor.
I'm sorry.
That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Andrew. We don't have any other individuals on council who've asked to or indicated that they'd like to ask a question. Last chance for that at this point. Anyone? Okay, not seeing any. So we do have a resolution here for this matter. The report that Mr. McCone has filed needs to be received for information. So I have a resolution that reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receives the 2020 Emergency Management Program Year-End Report for information. Councillor Richardson, can I call on you to serve as our mover for that one?
Absolutely, I will move that. Thank you.
Councillor Rothwell, will you serve as our seconder? Councillor Rothwell? Have we lost Councillor Rothwell? Councillor Rothwell, one more time. Okay, not seeing or hearing from him at this point in time. Councillor Seiler, will you serve as our seconder?
I will second that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate? Okay, seeing none, let's have that vote. And that is carried. Thank you. Just a quick query to Councillor Rothwell. Are you having audiovisual problems? So perhaps immediately suggest that maybe he is. Okay. Let's see if we can get some support for Councillor Rothwell on that. Thank you very much. Mr. McCone, again, our appreciation, our best wishes in your new role, and please stay in touch with us. I'm sure that that you will have some interesting stories to tell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate it.
Okay, next, going to turn our attention as item 4.2 to changes that have been made in the provincial platform for ATVs and off-road vehicles. Now, there are some opportunities now available to us perhaps to establish a bylaw in this area should we so wish. I think my approach tonight, unless I'm countermanded by the clerk, is that we're going to call on the clerk first to introduce this matter, set the stage for us. Then, as item 4.2.1, we have the opportunity to hear from Mr. Sean Thompson, representing the North Perth ATV Group. And then after that, perhaps the clerk will come back in. I'm not sure. It depends. I'll look to her nod at that point, and then we'll have an opportunity to consider our approach and give, I think, general guidance after looking at a draft bylaw that has been prepared by staff, but that obviously requires a little bit more work before we actually bring it fully to the council table. So with that plan in mind, let's start with Clerk Barfelds. I'm going to reset my AV so that we're not creating a black hole in the universe. Just hold on.
Council, the remainder of the very draft items on tonight's agenda is to provide an opportunity for staff to bring forward several items we've been working on during the past few months. We are looking forward to open discussion and comments from Council on how to proceed. The first agenda item is due to the new legislation concerning off-road vehicles. As noticed in my report, the ministry is changing the regulations from an opt-in model to an opt-out model. Several years ago, North Perth Council did consider adopting a bylaw to join in, but was defeated at that time. We do have Sean Thompson joining us from the local ATV group to share his opinions and provide council with some recommendations. I have provided Sean with a copy of the draft bylaw to review and comment on prior to tonight's meeting. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Sean Thompson.
Hey, good evening all, Mr. Mayor and Council. Here on the representation of North Perth ATV Club. Yes, so currently in North Perth, we don't allow ATVs, only for agricultural purposes. We would like to see a bylaw enacted to allow them on the municipal roads. Many of us are sportsmen, hunters, trappers, or just casual riders who would enjoy being able to get back and forth out to private properties that we're allowed to travel on, or just some simple back road riding. Our club is in its infancy, but we're continuing to grow. A lot of our members will help educate the public, and I was always be on the lookout for those who choose to break the law, because I know there's some fears and concerns about trespassing and noise and such. I've also spoke with officials from surrounding municipalities who allow them. The response is actually pretty good. There's been a few tickets handed out here and there, but other than that, it's seemingly going well for everybody else. I read over that proposed bylaw. It sounded really good. We don't have really anything. We'd like to change a couple little things about the months of riding. We'd like to see just tweak just a little bit, and the hours, because some of our days start an hour before sunset, an hour after sunset. But that is pretty much all I have on that. So yes, that was. Sorry, my internet's kind of poor tonight. Yeah, we totally agree with everything that's written in the proposed bylaw, and just like to hear what you guys think about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Before we let you go, I'm going to offer council the opportunity to ask questions, again, given your expertise in this matter. Perhaps the first and obvious question I'll put on the table, and that is, are there any sort of specific suggestions that you have to improve the language or the quality of this bylaw? You had mentioned something about timing of the day, and I'm wondering if it's feasible to fix the timing to when sundown goes, kind of thing. Maybe I'm not expressing myself too well there, but it makes sense that if I understood what you said, you're thinking that we should sort of tie things to sundown, and that's a moving target as opposed to a fixed target. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, my thoughts are actually, some of our days start usually a half hour before sunrise and the whole half hour after sunset. Just mainly that's just for hunting purposes and stuff like that, but I don't know if there may be exceptions there at all. Yeah, so say the upcoming turkey season, you're only allowed to hunt till 7 p.m., stuff like that.
Okay, so would you, if I, just to clarify then, would you advocate some fixed times that are sort of seasonal? Or would you advocate fixing it to sunrise and sunset and having periods around that, like a half hour before sunrise and a half hour after sunset, as sort of what the bylaw says is the acceptable time frame for use of the vehicles?
The seasonal thing would actually be pretty optimal as well too.
Okay, so if we set some different timelines around the seasons, then we might be getting a little further ahead with regards to what would appeal to those who want to use these vehicles in our community. That's fair?
Yes, that's definitely fair. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Other councillors with questions? Fairfields, do we have anyone on the list? Councillor Johnston first.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and Sean, thank you for your presentation. And it's kind of a question / comment is about the bad apples. And as a farmer, that's my issue is the ones that want to get out and just rip up farmland, especially when it's wet and stuff like that. In fact, even in the last fall and already this spring, we've had to chase one 4-wheeler out of properties already. So I was glad to hear that you guys were talking about policing it yourself and education. But that's my question is, what are we going to do about those bad apples that no matter what you do, they seem to want to get out in a farmer's field and rip up hay fields and you know, in the spring right now, get out and rip up some wheat fields and stuff like that. That's my biggest hindrance with this. And my biggest question mark is what do we do about the damage to farmers' fields?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jones. That's definitely a good question. What is our biggest concern too? We don't want that at all. We don't want to see the trespassing and stuff like that. Guess besides us policing it, and obviously farmers don't have the time to continually look out for their own land because some have a lot of land and they can't be there 24/7. Again, we'll try the best to educate the public, and like I said, bad people always be bad people, unfortunately. But hopefully we can counteract some of that with proper education and just speaking with others and continue to grow our group and hopefully get those people to join in with us.
Councillor Seiler is next.
Well, thank you, Sean, for coming in and giving us your time. I have two questions. My one question is, are you looking for just urban or rural, or are you looking for both? Permission for both, or just urban, or just rural?
Both actually. We just want to basically go from A to B. So say a lot of us do have hunting or prior property that we do use our machines on. Just getting back, because I would say, like my example, I live in town, just up by the Salvation Army Church there. Just for me to go gas up and then head out of town and stuff like that. We don't want any riding around town. We don't want any riding on the local trails or nothing like that. Just the transportation portion of it.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, if we were to get in a predicament of people traveling to our community, like snowmobiling does, and unloading their ATVs here, how do we police that, or would you allow that, or where would we go with that?
I'd say allow, but like I don't think we'll get that amount of traffic here just because we don't have the trails that they have and stuff like up north where they have like OFATV has a whole slew of trails farther north and stuff like that those guys are more concerned about. I don't think guys would be coming here from other places just to ride our back roads and stuff like that. Hopefully there's no concern about that, but yeah, I could definitely understand that.
Thank you, Sean. That was just my two concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Behrens is next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg. And it's not necessarily to Sean, even though, Sean, I appreciate your presentation. It's probably more for Clerk Bearfeltz and CAO Snell. So my understanding is what is suggesting that we actually need a bylaw, because right now you're in unless you say you're out automatically. Is that correct?
Okay, yes, that is actually what I was going to clarify when the questions were finished for Mr. Thompson, is that the change in the legislation, which I will agree is very confusing as you read all the attachments that I did provide. The point is today that ATVs or off-road vehicles are now allowed as per the legislation. What we've got before you tonight, Council, is a bylaw that would provide the restrictions, the timing, the speed, the routes that you would like enforced in North Perth.
Anything further, Councillor Barons?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Rothwell is next.
Thanks, Mayor Todd, and thanks, Sean, for your presentation. I appreciate that. I just want to follow up on something that Clerk Burfell's raised, is specifically about routes. Is your group interested in having specified routes established in this bylaw? And related to that, and this will be a question for staff, is can the municipality actually in our bylaw address county and provincial highways as part of our bylaw? So first question is to Sean. Thank you.
We don't have any specific routes in mind. Obviously, definitely not anything in the downtown core. Just maybe, just like I said, to gas up or to head out to private property. But yeah, we really didn't have anything specific in mind. We were going to kind of leave that up to council themselves and see what they think.
Thank you. And then my second question, I guess, is for Pat or Chris, someone to answer in terms of what our ability is to regulate ATVs and OTVs on provincial highways and county roads.
CAO Snell, will you take that one?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So my understanding is there's specific regulations for provincial highways, and I have read them, and I think there's a flaw in the current provincial regulation because it does talk about a intersection, Highway 23 to an intersection in North Perth, but it actually, I think, has the wrong Perth line designated because it says Perth line 44, and Perth line 44 is not in North Perth. And then county would be up to the county to enforce ATV on their roadways as well. So we would not have jurisdiction over either provincial highways or county roads.
Thank you. And just my last question, Mayor Todd, is specifically, I think Councillor Seiler raised this earlier, is how do people within our urban areas that perhaps have ATVs and so on go from their private residences out of town, so to speak, if in fact we don't allow ATVs to be ridden on those urban areas? So whether it's in Moncton, Atwood, or Listowel, or elsewhere, how are we going to deal with that? Thank you.
CAO Snell.
So I would assume we could use language like we have in our snowmobile bylaw that would allow direct route from residence to a specific road, or the other thing we do allow is for snowmobiles to be gassed up in town. So they would have to be proceeding directly from their residence to a designated permitted road or directly to a fueling station. We do have similar language in our snowmobile bylaw.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Councillor Richardson is next.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Kasenberg, and thank you, Sean, for the presentation. On one hand, I feel that we do need to have similar regulations as to what they have for snowmobiles, but I also was sort of curious that it does allude to in the comment section of the initial report that there was discussions with the OPP as far as policing, and I do understand that the ATV group would be trying to do self-policing, but as it was mentioned, it was a smaller group. That can they do it all? What's the actual comments from the OPP about as far as their capability and their ability to properly police this? Because we all know that you're going to have a bad apple. People go through stop signs in regular cars every day. That you're going to have people running amok, so to speak. But I'm just wondering what their opinions happen to be about this proposed changes to the Highway Traffic Act.
So I'm going to draw in Clerk Bearfeltz.
So I certainly have had conversation with Sergeant Quello. In fact, it was the correspondence he received through the OPP that encouraged him to have conversation with myself, and therefore we're here tonight. He recognizes the fact that the legislation is going to allow a change in regards to ATVs in our municipality, and his strong suggestion to me was that if North Perth Council should consider the areas that they wanted for restrictions. For example, the downtown core areas of the municipality was something he brought forward right away. Recognizing that those that ride the off-road vehicles do need the ability to access core services such as gas stations and the ability to leave the urban centers to the areas that they want to travel. He does recognize that, but it was encouraging council's discussion basically on the restricted areas.
Okay, anyone else? Councillor Duncan is next.
Yeah, it's no questions for Sean. It's a couple other, one is a comment. West Perth has had an ATV bylaw for quite a number of years now, and I know they do have some route restrictions within the town of Mitchell for sure. So we could definitely look at how they've went about it and maybe use some suggestions from their bylaw. And my second one was around the timelines, both daily and seasonally. There's already an exemption in the HTA for farmers and trappers. I'm just wondering, does this bylaw then supersede that, or does that supersede the bylaw when it comes to timing and seasonal restrictions?
Okay, we'll maybe turn that one to CAO Snell.
Typically, provincial law always supersedes any municipal bylaw. So I would say in this case, even if we pass a bylaw with certain restrictions, the Highway Traffic Act regulations would supersede those for the qualified designation of hunters and trappers, or farmers and trappers.
Okay, anyone else, Clerk Bearfeltz at this point? Deputy Mayor Kellum is next.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Todd. So are the ATVs only going to be allowed on the roads and not in the, like, is this going to make a lot of work for the farmers? As Councillor Johnson said earlier, they've had to chase people off. Is this going to make them put up no trespassing signs all over, or are we just talking for the roads?
CAO Snell, did you want to take a crack at that?
So this would specifically just given them permission to ride on certain roads in North Perth. However, there's always been the fear that once we provide access on the roads that they can then will potentially get off onto private property more easily. I'm not saying that will happen, but certainly as both Sean and Councillor Johnson alluded to, there are always some bad apples. I suspect those people are already performing poorly in our communities, but this would specifically just give them permission on our roads every landowner would still have to provide permission for people to be on their property.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, and that is pertaining to enforcement with regards to this. How would enforcement happen, and would there be fines attached to those who are in violation of any of the provisions, for example, on roads where they shouldn't be? I think I'll turn that over to Clerk Bartholz, maybe, or CAO Snell. Okay, CAO Snell.
I'm assuming we would just during the development of this, we could do prescribed fines, just like we do for any other bylaw that could be enforced by either our bylaw enforcement or the OPP.
Okay, thank you. And maybe a question for Sean in terms of enforcement. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about what you'd like to see moving forward if we were to write enforcement provisions into a bylaw?
Not really, but yeah, like I said, like definitely the bad apples want to make a example of them, so definitely the fines being handed out would be a learning lesson for them. Thank you.
Thanks. Do we have anyone else on our list at this point, Clerk Bartholz? Councillor Anstead is next.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Kasenberg. Through you actually took my question. I was just going to ask around enforcement as well. And regarding the fines, I don't know if this is another example for Chris, but if we've seen other bylaws throughout other municipalities, did they have the fine specifically stated in there, or were they kind of a separate amendment? Thank you.
I think maybe Clerk Bartholz wants to answer this one. Just set the AV right here.
Yep. CAO Snell may have further comment, but in my research, it was a little bit of everything. Some municipalities did have the applicable fines set right into their bylaws. Others did not. For instance, South Perth and Perth East, our neighbors, they both have bylaws, and I've got indications here of their differences in regards to their bylaws. They did not have the applicable fines assigned. In the noise bylaw you're going to look at later tonight, it alludes to ATVs and noise in that bylaw, but we could certainly look at that opportunity for them to be a schedule and attached and then approved by the Crown Attorney as per this bylaw. We'd be happy to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Clerk Bartholz, anyone else? Councillor Rothwell next.
Thanks, Mayor Todd. And my question is this, it was alluded to by Councillor Duncan previously, but regarding current exemptions for farmers and hunters under the Highway Traffic Act, and perhaps staff can address this and perhaps Sean can, I'm not sure, but one of the exemptions I believe is allowing farmers to go from farm to farm on a road for farm purposes and so on. And my concern is this, is that if in fact we have an exemption such as that which exists, and if we as a municipality move forward with a bylaw that has certain routes established, we sort of have two different rules in effect, if you will, and that could lead to confusion. How are we going to address that? And I guess that's going to be a question for staff first. Thank you.
Thanks. CAO Snell, let's start with you on this one.
So certainly I think it would just be a matter of education. I know, for example, here in counties had ATV bylaw for a number of years. Now it's specifically to certain county roads. And it's currently under review, so I can't comment on how well it has worked. But it would certainly be a matter of educating people what they can do as either a farm or farm property owner, or as a recreational ATV user. I think that would be up to both us and potentially the ATV club to make sure those rules are clear and well defined for everybody.
Thank you.
Clerk Brefels, do we have anyone else? Okay, so Council, I think, do you have any sort of wrap up synthesis comments you want to make, Clerk Brefels, on this, or are you satisfied?
I can. Mhm.
Yeah, okay, so let me just mute things here. Hold on.
So earlier, Councillor Duncan did allude to the West Perth bylaw, which I certainly have a copy of. They definitely have a route designated in their bylaw. So the area highlighted in yellow, as I have on your screens, this would be the opportunity if council would like to choose to do something similar. Otherwise, in South Perth, they basically dealt with, their bylaw deals with snowmobiles and off-road vehicles together in the same bylaw. They basically dealt with making sure that no one uses the sidewalk for the vehicle, as well as they have dealt with the speed. And in Perth East, they did some restrictions in regards to vehicles not being permitted in their parks, playgrounds, trails, and sidewalks under the jurisdiction of the Township of Perth East, as well as they are allowing them, or they are permitted in the urban areas 1/2 hour before sunrise and 1/2 hour after sunset. Just giving you some examples as to what our neighbors are doing. Council has the opportunity to make comment on the restrictions in this bylaw as well in regards to hours operations, as well as where and where not they would like them to travel, as well as their speed. And similar to other municipalities, this highlighted part of the bylaw is here for council's ability to designate a route or an area that they would suggest that they would move within the urban areas. So just, this is an opportunity for council's discussion, and as staff, we're more than happy to have you provide us with the input so we know how to bring back a bylaw or not to council at a later date.
Thanks, Clerk Barefels. So I think because we have somewhat relaxed rules for this meeting, I'm going to make a suggestion here, and let's see how council responds to it. Perhaps what we need to do is give this just a little bit more time and open up a consultation process. I think that process involves opportunity for councillors to put their input into the clerk with regards to possible routes and any revisions that might be seen. And the other possibility, of course, is to use Your Say North Perth to collect some public input on this subject matter as well. No doubt the public has some questions too. I'm sure that some of my Atwood neighbors will be very interested in the golf cart issue, which is seemingly a popular one in Atwood. So I think the only thing that forbears us from doing that is to ask council sort of upright how many are opposed to doing anything at this point. If we do nothing, as I understand it, the province has essentially liberalized and turned the table on the rules. And if we take no actions, then it's kind of a wide open field without any current restrictions in place beyond those which would prevail on county roads or on provincial highways. So are there any councillors amongst us who would choose to take no action at this point? Why don't you just identify yourself in the chat function, and we'll take note to see if there's a sufficient mass to ask the question more formally. So it does seem that council's wish, through having been asked that question, is to take some action. And therefore, I think we have had a decent briefing. Again, thank you, Sean Thompson, for joining us tonight as our resident expert on this matter. We've had ample questions asked at this point. There may be some that will come up in the aftermath of this meeting, but I think we should give this a little bit of space and time and perhaps consult with the public through Your Say North Perth as well. Is there anyone who has significant concerns about opening this up to public input? We're not seeing anything in the chat function. So council, then what's been proposed to us, and I think it's quite prudent, beyond that direction, and I think given where we sit, the direction is largely that. Councillors will have an opportunity to make a contribution now, and we'll set something up on your Say North Perth to collect a little bit of community-based data. But we have a resolution for our consideration as well, Council. It reads as follows: that the Council of the Municipality of North Perth receive the operation of off-road vehicles on municipal roadways report for information. Councillor Andreessen, can I call on you to serve as our mover for this?
Yes, I'll move that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Anstead, will you second that?
Yes, I would second that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so at this time, we're acknowledging what we're doing is receiving the report. It's a work in progress, and that we've identified a few steps sort of informally for staff to undertake on our behalf. Is there any discussion or debate on this matter? We're not seeing any. Okay, then let's have that vote.
My vote didn't come up. I'm in favor.
Thanks,
It's Leanne
Councillor
here.
Anderson. Yeah, got it. Okay, so with that, that's carried. Again, Mr. Thompson, much appreciation for you joining us tonight and helping us understand opportunities and good public policy. We're glad you could be with us.
Yes, definitely. Thanks for everyone for your time, and stay safe.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to turn our attention next then to item 4.3. The council has the opportunity at this point to receive some training, a little bit of training in bylaw enforcement, to consider planned actions in the near future pertaining to bylaw introduction, revision, and policies. And following that discussion, intended primarily for information exchange, we'll seek to give some direction to staff about how to proceed with draft policy and any needed guidance on the release of the educational or informational brochures about 4 key themes that have been shared with us in our council package. I think I'm turning this over to who? Are you starting with this one, Clerk Bearfelds? Okay, so we're going to turn this over to Clerk Bearfelds. Let me just set the AV stuff up. Right?
Council, on behalf of the Bylaw Department, Nicole Alexander, our North Perth Bylaw Enforcement Officer, has been busy developing draft bylaw policies and procedures documents, as well as new education materials. So at this time, I'd like to hand it over to Nicole, and she can further explain the draft opportunities that she has for Council's consideration tonight and how we'd like to proceed with them.
Thank you, Pat, and Mayor Kaysenberg, and good evening, Council. As everyone here has been able to see the policy, we just want to take a look at it and kind of go through a few things that allows people to have guidance for staff, elected officials, and the general public. It will help with our municipality as we grow to ensure a fair and due process is taken when complaints are received. This policy that you have been able to observe is a policy that can be observed through different municipalities and is something of what is considered to be common. Every complaint that we have and investigate are different, and there are different avenues that we can take within our approach. Overall, we try to gain compliance over everything else, but we do have different avenues such as orders, fines, and tickets. I'm only going to summarize a few different things within this policy, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Firstly, as a small department, it's impossible to actively ensure that all of the various municipal bylaws are being complied with at all times. This is why we rely on complaints as our majority way we receive incidents. However, us as bylaw officers will act upon violations if we see them while we're out enforcing other violations or observe them while we're on duty, but the majority of our complaints will be received through the public and or yourselves. Secondly, I wanted to reiterate the confidentiality is the utmost importance when it comes to our bylaws and receiving these complaints. We do not give out, nor can we disclose names or information about complaints or investigations. This information is protected underneath the authority of the Municipal Freedom and Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This applies to staff, council, and the public. We will let people know if they wish how to obtain this information. And Pat would be able to explain that process a little bit better if you have any questions about it. Thirdly, the decisions that we have as bylaw officers and within the department can take time. And sometimes these complaints can take longer than others. This can be due to extenuating circumstances, more investigations needing to be done, or the officer or department needs to work with other departments within the municipality to gain compliance or an understanding of what's going on. It is understood that people always want to have concerns and issues resolved quickly, and we understand frustrations around these people and the different concerns that they have. We also need to have an understanding as a bylaw officer and a department that circumstances or abilities of people can differ from one another. This does not mean we will not enforce a violation, but it can come down to our discretion on a time frame or a form of enforcement. For example, if someone has fallen under a financial hardship, given even a circumstance like COVID, we as bylaw officers can use our discretion to work with a person to ensure no further hardships are forced on them because of us. This simply could mean that they may need more time versus someone who's not going through the same hardships. Sometimes when complaints are received, it's forgotten on the other end that these two are people and we need to treat them with the same respect and fairness and dignity that we would want ourselves to be treated with. Our overall goal with this policy, like I stated before, is to have compliance, but an understanding of everybody within the community that there is policies and procedures that we follow. As our municipality grows, policies and procedures will continue to form, change, and expand, and this will allow the enforcement to be consistent and fair, and this policy is just going to be the beginning within the department. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thanks, Ms. Alexander. Council, do you have any questions? Clerk Perpels, are you seeing anything queued up at this point? We're not seeing anything queued up. Okay. Councilors, any questions? So I'll offer a couple of comments, actually. First of all, this policy document needs a little bit of a proofread. There are some spelling and grammatical things that probably should be cleaned up a little bit in terms of our advancing this forward. With that, I think, like, to me, when I look at this, I look at a complete and virtuous system. And, you know, my outcomes, it's for me, it's about what the outcomes are that respect the dignity and the circumstances, as you've described quite well, Ms. Alexander. But I think you know, one of the areas that I have taken note of that I am concerned about is the return and report phase to the complainant. And I'm not convinced that we have that down pat yet. I think that we need to do a little bit of work in thinking about how we close the loop with the complainant, given, as you've pointed out quite rightly, that there are some concerns about confidentiality. The complainant needs to know that their complaint has either been perceived as vexatious or the terms in the policy frivolous. Or that in fact they were investigated and that there is some action that's been taken. And I don't think that the details necessarily need to be given, but the complainant needs to know that we have responded. In the absence of knowing that, there is a concern that our team is not doing its part to the general protection and interest of the community. And so I guess I have a concern that we make sure that we think about the possible ways that we can achieve that respects people's dignity and their right to privacy, that allows a closure of that loop so that the complainant knows that something has happened or, you know, will happen. Because I think that in the absence of that, there's a concern. I think the other piece of the puzzle that I found a little bit interesting in this policy was definitions around frivolous and vexatious and so forth, and determination. And I mean, let's be honest, it puts a lot of discretion in your hands to make that determination. I think that probably a policy of this nature requires a second level review, so that if you're going to dispatch something as frivolous or vexatious, that another person needs to see it, whether it's your staff peer or whether it's your manager in your reporting chain. I think that we need to make some provision for a second level review before we dispatch something as frivolous or vexatious. Those are a couple of things that I took note of. Anyway, I appreciate the work. I think it's a very interesting piece of work for our community, and certainly speaks to many expressed opinions about the importance of bylaw enforcement and the importance of maintenance of property standards, in particular in our community, which were certainly drawn to my attention as a candidate for the office of mayor during that period of time. Clerk Perfelds, do you have some other? Councilor Rothwell.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and thank you, Nicole, for your report. I appreciate the overview and the proposed policy that we see here. Now, one of the loops that the mayor talked about was sort of for council and the public to understand sort of the volume of work that you're responsible for, you and your colleagues are responsible for. And I would note that in part of our chief building officials report, we do see some information there regarding complaints and so on from time to time. Are you prepared now, or perhaps maybe in the future, we could see a report that would give us as council some additional understanding and the public understanding in terms of the volume of complaints that you're dealing with, and how those complaints are dealt with in terms of compliance, perhaps, or charges laid under the Provincial Offences Act, as the case may be. Is that something that you're working towards or would elaborate on for us, so that perhaps there could be better understanding in terms of the workload and processes that you're dealing with, Nicole? Thank you.
Absolutely. We have a newer reporting system. Inside the policy, you would have seen the term Fire Pro, and that has allowed us to track incidences more effectively when it comes to compliance and how things have been taken care of when it comes to that. There's a spot where it has ticketing and everything like that. So we are able to do that report. I'm not able to deliver it right now, but at a later date, we could do that for sure.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Councilor Rothwell. And to me, that's part of the council dashboard as well. That is a project that we have on our table. Councilor Andreessen is next.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg. I just have some really minor formatting suggestions. And my first suggestion is around table 3-1. It's on page 52 of our agenda package. It just has a chart, and then instead of providing the prohibited period of time, it asks you to refer to a chart. And I'll be honest, I find that extremely frustrating to go back and forth to continue to, you know, figure out what's in the chart and then figure out where the letter is. If it was just in the chart, this chart's not that big. If the timings were just in the chart, it would make it so much easier for the user to reference. And my second point is just around digital format of all this information that could be shared with the public. In the package, it's all done and in terms of a pamphlet. But when things are digital, sometimes the formatting of a pamphlet isn't ideal. So just something to think about in terms of digitizing this information for our community. Thanks.
Councilor Seiler is next.
Thank you, Mayor Todd, and thank you, Nicole, for your report and the work you do for our municipality. I guess the question I have, I've dealt with a few of these issues and whatnot with different people, and there's always a form that I've had actually carry around with me, and that if somebody has a complaint, they're to fill the form out, and or else come into the office here and fill it out. With COVID, people aren't able to do that now. So how are we? Just taking phone calls and accepting it verbally over the phone for the complaints for you to work with, or how's that all being worked out now with our COVID? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Terry. So when I started in May, it was during COVID, and I actually uploaded a digital form that is fillable on our website. So they can go right to the website and fill out the form there. And we do take phone calls and emails as long as they're willing to provide information, such as their name, their phone number, and a way for we can contact them for clarity based on any complaint questions that we may have from that point. But they are able to go online and fill out a form that way.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know that.
And we still take the forms if they're dropped off in a Dropbox at the front door as well, Councillor Scott.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks. Any other comments or questions about this at this point, Clerk Fairfield, that you're seeing indication of? Okay. Council, I don't know that we have a resolution per se. I think this was about an airing of this matter and of some of the documentation that surrounds the matter. So I think, you know, there were some items in the policy that I've taken note of and shared. I think that we've heard from Councillor Andreessen about some formatting things that were probably warranted. And so the clerk has indicated that she's taking notes, and this feedback will be fed into a next iteration of this document set. So I don't think we have to do anything further according to the clerk. Right? Okay. Last chance for any comments on this before we move on to our next item on the agenda. Okay, not seeing anything, so let's move forward. Item 4.4, Council is asked to consider a draft of a noise bylaw. Now, I learned that we have one. This is an update, and so tonight's purpose is to receive this draft again for information and to determine how, again, we best unfold a process should one be desired. Move this forward as part of our bylaw review here. So I'm calling on Nicole again. Is Nicole to speak to this? Very good. Thank you. Ms. Alexander, our bylaw enforcement officer, is also going to bring us a common understanding on this one. Welcome again.
Thank you, Mayor Todd. So yes, we do currently have a noise bylaw, and this is a draft to make a few amendments to it. Basically, throughout this past year, there have been a few calls that have come in that may have alluded to a need for some changes. One of those would be in addition to the ATVs. We want to make sure that is in conjunction with it to make sure that we are having an understanding of the noise for the ATVs. Another thing that has been added is the persistent barking definition. Before, we didn't have a definition what would allow us to have a better enforcement aspect to it. The way that we have it now worded allows us to have a time frame indicator when discussing a complaint. Before, it was a little more unrealistic. We know that dogs are going to have, you know, a bark or two at a squirrel, but now we have that persistent barking, and we can have a little bit more investigative timeframes for it. The second thing that we added was the off-road ATVs, like Pat had mentioned in the draft bylaw. Again, making sure it would follow into the table and timeframes if it is adopted. We removed the firearm noise, as this can cause issues around enforcement. If these calls were to be received, they would be directed to OPP as their matter versus a noise issue. The operations of electronic devices or groups of connected devices, etc. So listening to a personal music We have extended the possibilities of that time to 2100 to 0700. For example, if someone wanted to have a late dinner outside on a barbecue, enjoying their music personally, we feel that they doesn't need to be restricted to the old times, which was 7 p.m. The operation of use of a domestic tool other than snow removal, we're suggesting that the restrictions be adjusted to 2000 hours to 0700 hours. For example, a lawnmower being used due to a homeowner not being able to get home until 6:30 should not have to worry about a noise complaint because they're taking care of their property. This was an actual concern that was received a couple of times this past year. Homeowners were worried about that they were going to get a noise complaint concern because they were out mowing their lawn at 7 o'clock when it was fully daylight. And lastly, they are looking at adding fines, as you can see. So this would be in partnership to other municipalities. They do have fines associated with noise, and they found that having fines associated with this would help with deterrent and some prevention with a noise bylaw.
Ms. Alexander, I assume you finished your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's begin with council questions and first comments. Councillor Duncan.
I just have a question about the chart. I think it's 3.1, yeah. Number 2, could I just get an example of what that exactly is?
That one would be, we don't get a call for this one very often. I can't think of anything specific within this community that we've had this. But it could be something similar to a model, small model engine car or airplanes, small engine airplanes, stuff like that. I haven't seen this come into effect in our area often.
So to further that question then, say somebody had a gas powered remote control car, is that now prohibited under this bylaw to be used by somebody on their property?
So this one hasn't changed from the last bylaw. We kept this one the exact same as it has been in previous years.
So I guess I wonder if there should be some updating of that in that case, potentially maybe then. Okay, thanks.
I find myself wondering, Councillor Duncan, if the issue is how loud that small motor car is or go-kart or whatever it is that is on property, whether public or private, if it was excessively noisy, I think that would be the point, right? I found myself also wondering if it was about drones, but I don't think drones are that noisy. I don't know. Councillor Richardson is next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg. I'm just wondering about the the operation, point number 13, the operation or use of any tool for domestic purposes other than snow removal. I don't understand why it wouldn't be consistent with the prohibited period of time of day of being 9 to 21 hours to be 9 p.m. I'm just wondering why it's down to 8 p.m. because obviously we get a lot more daylight in the summertime if someone's building a deck or doing something. Is 9 o'clock really that and keeping the hours consistent? Like from A and B, we got the tool one is I don't know what else is under listed for C. Solid waste, bulk lift. yeah, I'm just wondering if 9 o'clock is suitable, but that's only my recommendation, especially for the tools. If someone's building a deck or like you had made mention to cutting their grass or to doing whatever, 8 o'clock is still pretty early in the summertime when we're light till 9:30. That's all I have. So I'm just wondering if that time can be looked at. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Richardson. That actually, again, we might even want to think about seasonal basis for this. Maybe there's some seasonal timelines in this. I know that might actually make the more complex, but at the same time, it also makes it more responsive to, I think, the reason Councillor Richardson's speaking on. Anyone else on the list? Clerk Fairfields? Anyone else want to have a take on this? Okay, we're not seeing any indication of any further comments on this one. This one's like the last one. It was an opportunity for input. Council, do you sense there's any need to consult the public on this matter through your say North Perth, or shall we, because this has existed and what we're doing is looking at relatively housekeeping type amendments, updates, shall we just sort of keep this moving in our system with the comments that have been made so far? If anyone really wants to put it out to public comment, can you offer in the chat? Yeah, so it sounds to me like most of us view this as housekeeping, and we'll just commend to the bylaw enforcement team and the clerk who's made notes, some of the things that we have a few concerns about, but I'd like to see another draft of this with those concerns addressed or dealt with one way or the other in the near future so that we can push this forward. Okay, any last thoughts from council before we move on to the next item on the agenda? Councillor Behrens, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Kasenberg. Thank you, Nicole, for your presentation once again. I'm just wondering about possible reports and that. It's very hard for us to read these bylaws and kind of be a little bit nitpicky about what goes in, what doesn't go in. When we don't know the complaints that have been lodged, I mean, there may be other things, it's not just, the daylight hours from 8 in the morning to 8 at night that, shift people and that they have other issues with noise and sound throughout the day. So is it possible to get some sort of yearly reporting on all of these items that you've presented with ideas of, what kind of noise complaints are we getting, for example, so that we kind of have a little bit more of a background? It's great to get the bylaw and to review the bylaw, and it's greatly appreciated that we've taken the time to do that. But it would be somewhat easier for some of us, for our understanding, to know what complaints have been historically made and what section of the bylaw they're under, type thing. Just for future, it doesn't have to happen right away.
Thanks, Councillor Behrens. That was an interesting and constructive suggestion. And Clerk Berfelds has indicated she'd like to weigh in, so I'm just going to set my AV for that.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Behrens. And as we move forward with this bylaw, tonight's opportunity was just that, an opportunity for council to provide us with input and suggestions. When we return to council with the adoption of the bylaw, we will make certain that a report is attached, and we'll try and include some of those examples and that background information for council as a basis for the adoption of the bylaw.
Thanks. Anyone else before we move on to the next item on the agenda? CAO Snell.
Just sort of going to address some of Councillor Behrens' questions, and I think the difficulty is even our former bylaw was written at the time of amalgamation, and really just brought forward the listable prescriptions, and a lot has changed even since amalgamation as far as our world being 24/7, 7 days a week. And we, as Councillor Behrens has mentioned, we do have a lot of people who work shifts and all sorts of different activities. And so I would say, just anecdotally, and with Nicole and Marita in place, we can now make better stats. But quite often, most of our complaints are actually around stuff that is permitted within the bylaw. It's from people who are maybe working shift work and they're just hearing sort of the usual day-to-day noise. And then I would say our most common complaint is actually snow removal equipment, which we do permit because we need to permit because of the climate we live in. But that's certainly probably, in my experience, our most common complaint comes in through the wintertime of snow removal equipment, either ours or through private companies, which I don't think we can look at sort of getting rid of just because we need to have the community open and operating when the sun comes up. But we can certainly track that going forward much better now with the staff in place.
Thanks, CEO Snow. That's helpful. I think I'm intrigued to some degree by Councillor Barrett's suggestion, though. It would be interesting almost to maintain an annotated version of the bylaw in which we document where complaints are lying and sort of the nature of those complaints as a possibility. It might be just statistical, but it might be that there's some stories behind it too to help us understand as we move forward year after year where revisions might be made. Okay, let's move on then to 4.5 in the absence of someone shouting at me here. Staff does desire to provide us with an update on dog control and on our partnership for that purpose with the Stratford Humane Society. And I believe Clerk Bearfeltz is our expert here, so I'm going to set the AV settings so she can speak without causing problems in the universe.
I'm not sure that I'm an expert, but I did want the opportunity just to take a few minutes to remind Council of our role with the Humane Society. At this time, they are assisting us with pound services for lost dogs and investigations of dog cruelty and abuse. This has changed a little bit since our previous relationship with the animal control officers of the past. Just wanting, I know Council's been getting questions and requiring some clarity to the public in regards to the change. Social media has actually been an excellent method for us to report lost and found dogs, as well as there's a group called Lost and Found Pets in North Perth, Listowel and area that have been very successful with stray dogs as well. This year, we started a new process where owners receive a tag without the actual year on it. No longer has this tag stated that it's 2021. We felt that producing a new tag every year has been a waste. Owners then are invoiced annually in the event that their dog loses their tag. There certainly is an opportunity to purchase a replacement tag at a very nominal fee. This dog tag system has been very beneficial. And we have we now have all the contact information with the dogs registered with the municipality, and that certainly does make it easier for us to find the dog owners. As mentioned during my budget presentation for 2021, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have not been able to meet or attend any training as per the agreement. But that will happen as soon as the pandemic allows us. To date, we have only a few dogs requiring the pound services and one investigation into dog abuse. And as I said, as soon as it's safe to do so, the applicable North Perth staff will be trained by the Humane Society in dealing with aggressive dogs, and we will be invited to attend their facility. So just letting Council have a brief understanding that things have changed, but we feel very confident that we're meeting the demands of the community in regards to dog control.
Thanks, Clerk Fairfelds, for the update. Are there any questions or comments about that update? I know the clerk was telling me as we were preparing for tonight's meeting that it's a very straightforward thing generally to identify a dog that's gotten loose in the community with the dog tag system and database that they're managing now. So that's an encouraging story. Any questions or comments? Okay, we're not seeing any, so let's move on then to item 4.6 on our agenda. Chief Building Inspector Ed Podnowitz will provide insight into how the bylaw enforcement team interacts with the building department to lead to appropriate outcomes with regards to both building code and property standards. These are points of intersection, as I assume Mr. Podnowitz is going to outline. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Mayor Kasenberg and members of council. Pat has asked me to give you a briefly describe the differences and similarities associated with the bylaw officers and building officials. So building departments, their main function is enforcement of the Ontario Building Code and the Building Code Act. And the property standards was introduced into the Building Code Act a number of years ago. So it just gives the property standards more flexibility in regards to set or fines and on provincial offenses and that type of thing. So all building department staff, as well as bylaw officers, are appointed by municipal council to perform their prescribed duties. So typically, building inspectors enforce building code regulations associated with building permits, and bylaw officers enforce municipal bylaws. In some cases, bylaw officers encounter situations where a building inspector's knowledge and training are more suitable to the situation, such as determining an unsafe building, for instance. Building officials are trained and certified through the Ministry of Housing to perform their duties associated with the Ontario Building Code, whereas bylaw officers are trained and certified through MLEO, which is the Municipal Law Enforcement Officers Association, to perform their duties associated with municipal bylaws such as parking, noise bylaws, property standard bylaws, etc. So in a nutshell, this is just a brief description of our duties and responsibilities, and I would be happy to entertain any questions if you have any.
Thanks, Mr. Podnowitz. I think we get a sense of some of the intersection and some of the different points, which is helpful. Also, any questions or comments for Mr. Podnowitz? Okay, we're not seeing any. So again, I don't think we're making this resolution on this report. It's a training-oriented discussion opportunity, and we'll leave that there. So, council, that brings us to the end of the general agenda for this special council meeting. Clerk Fairfelds, is there anything that we need to address before we consider the confirmatory bylaw?
No, I'll just do a little summation, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Council, I would just like to take the opportunity to thank you for your time, insight, and your input. You will see these reports, policies, and the bylaws coming back to regular council meetings. This is a great opportunity to provide to understand your input and for us to have a better understanding to provide the bylaws going forward and using the time, I think, most beneficially. So again, thank you on behalf of the department. And like I said, you'll see these documents coming back to council at future council meetings.
Thanks, Clerk Fairfelds, and to our other participants tonight, to Ms. Alexander, to Mr. Podnowitz, who assisted us in understanding some of the matters that were before us, and for their diligent labors to make sure that we have bylaws that work for people and treat people well. That's very much appreciated. Thanks to the CAO tonight for general subject matter expertise. We appreciate the contributions as well. Council, I have two resolutions to go here. The first is our confirmatory bylaw, which of course is a good practice that helps us to confirm all of our actions in this meeting. Let me read out the resolution for that. First, the bylaw number 33-2021, being a bylaw to confirm generally previous actions of the Council of the Municipality of North Perth, be introduced, read, and considered read a first, second, and third time, and be finally passed. And the said bylaw be signed by the mayor and the clerk and sealed with the seal of the corporation. Can I call on Councillor Behrens to be our mover for that one?
Yes, I would move that motion. Thank you.
Thanks. And Councillor Duncan, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you. Any discussion or debate on this one? Seeing none, let's have that vote.
I'm in favor, Mayor Todd. My vote's not coming up. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Andreessen. So with Councillor Andreessen's vote, that is carried. Thank you. And then before we consider a motion to adjourn, is there any further business that is urgent and needs to be addressed at this meeting? Hearing or seeing no indication of that, I have a motion to adjourn, which reads as follows. That the council meeting adjourns at 8:30 p.m. to meet again for general council business on Monday, April 12th, 2021. Can I call on Councillor Rothwell to be our mover for this one?
I so move.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Callum, will you serve as our seconder?
Yes, I will second that motion. Thank you.
That's not debatable, so let's have that vote.
I'm in favor.
Thanks, Councillor
My
Seiler.
vote, my vote's not coming up either. I'm in favor as well.
Thanks, Councillor Andreessen. So that is unanimous and carried. Thank you, Council. We are adjourned until April 12th. Good night.